think it's good. Yeah. I think that's good, yes.
This is it.
Well, at least... No, I haven't been camping. I was going to go the Memorial Day weekend, and then it was too hot. No, it was the heat. I think I was most bothered about, because it's like, you know, you don't want to have a campfire when it's 90 degrees. So no, I haven't. Oh, that was my last planned trip, and it's been hot since then, so probably won't go till the fall. Yeah, they do say you're supposed to look up and make sure there are no widow makers above you when you pitch your tent, that's for sure. Yes, Brad says we're live. So I still think there's still 2 seconds left. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start our service today with gathering music from Sandra Thomas. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. Welcome everyone to Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Chris Adkins. I'm a member of the worship committee. At Westside, we strive to be an institution that shares its values with the world. I was just reflecting before the service, what is it that makes our country, the United States of America, different from other countries? People have come to the United States from all over the world, and so it's not like that the people here in the United States are any different from any other people, but the country has been founded with strong values and strong institutions. I'd like to think that we are one of those institutions that can help encourage and pass on those values and continue to do so both now and in the future. Those values are inclusiveness, justice, hope, gratitude, and a host of other positive traits. And we hope that you will join us in continuing to promote those values. Whether you are with us here today in the sanctuary or you are joining us right now online during the service, or whether you're watching again in the future, we welcome you to the service today, and we hope you will continue to come back and join us. And I think I will draw your attention to announcements in the order of service, and those announcements will also be displayed up for you if you are on YouTube. And Carol is going to invite the singing bowl to sound. Yes?
I did see one update in the News Sentinel yesterday. The black bottom got its $15,000, but the costs have gone up to $19,000. But they're really close.
Okay, I'll better repeat that for everybody. So the bottom had a fundraising target for $15,000, which was met, but their requirements have now increased. They now need $19,000. So I guess we need to continue to support that institution. Thank you.
Thanks for that update, Lori. Yeah, for those of you who might not be aware of it, the bottom had a major plumbing issue. They lost all their plumbing went out, and they had to have that repaired. So good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Reverend Carol Bodeau. I am privileged to serve here as minister. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I want to say a special good morning to those of you who are visiting us virtually, whether it's your first time or your 100th time. We're glad to have you here. We recognize that there are many people with us who might not be sitting in this room, but who are still here with us. So today we're going to be talking about how the heck to get along. Right? We say we have shared values, and we say that even as a nation we have shared values, but clearly we have different ideas about how to express or live or embody or do things. We're going to have disagreements. We're going to not be sure how to collaborate sometimes. So today we're going to be talking about how we can be good citizens in our model from last week, together, working together on living visions. So as the bowl sounds, I invite you to just first notice yourself as an individual, and then in whatever way feels comfortable to you. That might be looking around the room. It might be just being aware of people around you. Notice that you are both an individual and also part of something bigger, of a collective.
The flaming chalice is the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and now we will light the chalice and our community candles, which we light to commemorate all the pain and suffering that is going on in the world, and to recognize that is happening, even though we may be able to sit comfortably today. Our chalice lighting reading was written by Ma Teresa Tet Gustilo Gallardo, or Reverend Tet of the Philippines, and it's called "We Cast Not Our Eyes Below." We cast not our eyes below. We say to ourselves, we are how we came. wounded from struggles, triumphant in our survival, entitled by birthright to belong to this, the only humankind there is, saying, I am included, I belong here, and I will be and do. I will breathe joy into desolation. I will breathe peace into conflict. I will breathe life into destruction. I will be the earth I wish to see. I am growth and hope and glee.
Thanks, Chris. Is this working? Is this one on? Nope. One moment, please. Technical support. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Brad. That's we just want to take a moment to give a shout out to Brad Kurtz in the back of the room, who handles the tech for us. Invisible on your live stream, mostly invisible in the room, yet the person who makes it all happen, really. So we're going to try a little singing experiment next. We're going to do a little exercise in collaboration and teamwork. So we're going to sing together. I'm going to ask the choir to come on up. Choir, come on up. So what the choir is going to do is help lead this, okay? So if you guys can make a little line here, get next to the people you're singing with, because that makes it easier. And what we're going to do is we're going to sing the meditation on breathing. Notice you don't have books. You don't need them, because the words are really simple. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love.
When I breathe out, I breathe out.
That's as complicated as it gets, okay? And what's going to happen is the choir is going to sing through it twice, and then you're going to join them. And they might add some other little parts on top of that. So they're going to sing through it twice, then we're going to all sing through it twice together, okay? Are we ready? You barely got started. Well, maybe we'll do it at the end again now that you've practiced it, and after you hear the sermon, you'll all be like, oh, now we got it. This is easy. Okay. So you all have heard me talking about all these changes in our denomination, right? You've heard me talking about how we're changing our principles and our purposes. You heard me talking about all the stated new accountability, right? You've heard me talking about these things. But the question is, how? How do we actually, what does that even mean? How is that different? What does it look like? How is it different than what we've been doing? And I have been thinking a lot about this shift from subject to consumer to citizen. We have had, I think Tracy, my fiance, is kind of over it, because like every single thing that happens at home, I'm like, oh, that was a consumer thing. Oh, that was a citizen thing. Oh, that was, right? Because we sort of do all of them in our daily lives without really thinking about it. So many of you know, if you've been around a little while, you know that one of my absolute favorite sort of teaching tools is Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. And it is coming to my attention that Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, it's sometimes called NVC, is the ultimate citizen tool. Okay? So we're going to talk about it today as we talk about how to be in relationship in a different way, in a kind of citizen kind of way. Because relating as citizens is different than relating in these other ways. So some of you may have participated in the past. I've done some practice groups in what I slightly adapt Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. We call it compassionate communication. And this is a technique that helps us communicate in ways that are collaborative rather than competitive. Communication can be really tough, right? You don't need to raise your hand, but how many times have you had the experience of struggling to get your point across to someone? I'll raise both hands for all of you. Yeah, right? That's a thing. Sometimes we feel like no matter what we say, we're not being heard. They can't hear it. They don't care what we're saying. They don't believe us. They don't agree with us, so they're just not going to listen to our very obviously more logical and relevant perspective, right? At the heart of a lot of our conflicts and struggles and in the way we interact as humans is what we could call a kind of ineffective communication. And ineffective communication isn't ineffective. This is a new perspective. You have been taught that if your communication is ineffective, it's because you haven't been persuasive enough. I'm going to say, maybe that's not the real reason. Ineffective communication might be the result of a bigger problem, which is not understanding why we're communicating in the first place. Not understanding our own motives for communicating. And this brings me back to a comment I made in one of our previous services on these changes, which is we have to decide if it's more important to be right or be in relationship. Most of the time when we're communicating, we think that our primary goal is to be right, not to be in relationship. So are we trying to convince or persuade someone so that we can be right, which actually is about making us feel safer? If we're really at the heart of it, why do we want to convince someone? Why can't they have a different perspective? Because we'll feel safer if they agree with us. Do we want to connect with someone, which we often don't actually want to acknowledge? Real security might come from connection, but often we prioritize competition. So think about that for a minute. Think about how competitive. I was a college English teacher. I have learned very well how to be a competitive speaker, right? And don't get me wrong, there are situations in which communication, where the goal of the communication is to set a clear boundary, to express some kind of absolute clarity, or to define absolutes. There are communication situations in which that is the case. But much of the time when we're talking with people that we care about specifically, or even people with whom we have long-term connections that might be social connections or professional connections, we might want to consider that it's more important to maintain the connection in the long term than to be right in the short term. Now, I want you to sit with that for a second and notice what comes up in your thoughts specifically, but maybe also in your feelings when you hear that. What happens when I say that many times it's better to set aside what's right or wrong, or whose facts are more accurate, or what's better or worse, to set that whole thing aside in order to build or maintain a connection with another person? Usually one of the first things that comes to our mind when we entertain that possibility is this: well, I will not be a doormat. I will not deny, I will not pretend that I agree with them when I don't. Which is a normal human reaction, but it's actually born out of fear and defensiveness rather than some courageous, bold willingness to connect across difference. So today we're going to talk about some of the qualities of steward leaders. We've been talking about stewardship leadership, right? And these are qualities that help us be more effective leaders in our lives, in our families, and in our world. Some of these qualities may seem antithetical to what we have typically thought of as leadership. The ones we're going to talk about today are vulnerability, emotional maturity, and mentoring. We're going to explore how and why it can sometimes be really, really, really important to take the attention off of being right and put it onto being in relationship. So vulnerability and maturity and attention to mentoring are essential qualities in deep communication and relationship building. So we're going to start with, let's just define those concepts in the context of stewardship leadership, which is what we've been talking about. Now remember, let's back up just a second. The point of stewardship leadership is this. We each as individuals and all of us together as a collective in this collective community or in our larger society, we all are leaders in some ways. We all lead our own lives. We lead or guide or influence in our families, in our work environments, in our communities, and in our world. Every one of us is a leader in some way. And when we lead, we are bringing our values to life. We are embodying and living our values in a way that is a model or a demonstration to other people. Isn't that actually the goal of being right? Think about a situation in which you've wanted to be right and somebody else wrong. Wasn't the goal of that distinction trying to lead others to share your values or your perspective? Stewardship leadership is about doing that, leading and guiding and influencing in ways that honor other people's unique gifts and talents and needs and concerns equally with our own. And so when we do that, we're focusing on the values, not our rightness and their wrongness or vice versa. So when we do that, rather than leading or relating by persuasion, domination, conquest, competition, force, the alternative tools might be a little uncomfortable. They are vulnerability, transparency, emotional maturity. Those allow us to lead through building connection. So now the first requirement in this paradigm is to be vulnerable. So what the heck does that mean? What does it mean to be vulnerable? Especially when what we have been taught is to be strong, to be bold, like to be strong, to prove that we're not vulnerable. So how is vulnerability and modeling true vulnerability something that allows for our values to be expressed more fully? What does that look like, you might ask? Why would I want to do that? Because doesn't it implicitly put me in a place of inferiority and weakness if I start out by being vulnerable? Well, in fact, I will bring up one of my favorite sociologists, Brené Brown, and all those who have followed her lead. Brené Brown is a sociologist who has shown very clearly and very scientifically that, in fact, vulnerability is the single most important ingredient to human happiness. Not success, not winning, not having the most toys, not following your path the most directly. That none of those things are deciding factors in our happiness. The deciding most powerful factor in human happiness is our capacity to be vulnerable with one another. Okay? To be able to show our own confusion and uncertainty and acknowledge our limitations, that is what we as human beings actually need to be happy. Because let's face it, we actually need each other. We really want, secretly sometimes, or sometimes more honestly, we want to have the option to be our full selves, our human selves, with all our mess up and our limitations, and I don't know, and I don't have a clue, and whatever, right? I failed at that. We actually want to be accepted for those things as much as for our strengths. And since that's true of other people as well, not just me, being able to demonstrate that in relationship actually is really wonderful for the other person. So ask yourself this: how comfortable are you showing your uncertainty, your weakness, your limitation, your confusion, your ambivalence? How comfortable are you even having that experience of not knowing, of being uncertain? Sometimes we are so uncomfortable feeling that we won't even let ourselves have it. By gosh, we will convince ourselves that we know the answer. Even when there's a little voice in the back of our head that's saying, yeah, I'm not so sure. I have a little bit of ambivalence about that, but by gosh, I'm going to squash that ambivalence, right? So it can be hard just to show and experience our own vulnerability. And here's an even trickier part of it. Once we acknowledge our vulnerability and our limitations, can we do it without beating up on ourselves? Can we do it without saying, okay, well, I'm failing there, or I have to fix that, or that's something wrong with me? Can we just say, wow, I have no clue. Wow, I messed that up. Okay. Imagine if you had people around you who modeled that so that you could be comfortable being that way around them. Can we acknowledge that we are human without needing to defend ourselves in the process of being human or blaming someone else for their humanness getting in our way? So, this is a challenging model. It's actually pretty counter-cultural, really. The first step in Rosenberg's nonviolent communication model is being able to identify when something impacts you in a way that makes you feel not awesome. Okay? In our most typical conversations, let's everybody imagine yourself in a situation where someone has said or done something that really upset you. You didn't like it. You're upset. We typically go straight to the persuasive argument version of communication and we say, you did this thing, it was bad, stop it. It was bad for these 3 reasons, stop it, I don't like it, you have to change. Some version of that is pretty much typically how we communicate. It's pretty much how we interact with the world, right? I see or experience this thing, I don't like it, it makes me feel yucky, so here's why it has to change. This model is different. This model is based on the assumption that what happened, you and the other person both have a need that you don't know how to meet. So, for example, in a conversation about politics or the world with a person you're close to, but not necessarily in full agreement with, what would it look like to communicate differently? Could you say, wow, that really triggered me. I feel really upset. Just, not that you have to do anything to change it, but wow, I'm having a feeling. Or do we go directly to needing to prove the other person wrong for how they acted or what they said or what they did? Being willing to be vulnerable, to shift the paradigm, opens the door for the other person maybe not feeling like they have to defend themselves. What happens usually when you say, you did this thing and it was awful? What's the first thing the other person does? They're going to do one of 2 things. They're going to either go, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. Or more commonly, y'all know what they're going to do. I did not, you're wrong. And then you have some version of an emotional shouting match about whose needs and perspective is more important. Frequently landing in a stalemate, frequently resulting in repeated iterations of this aforementioned conversation over and over and over again. Does this sound familiar? Is that sounding familiar to anybody? Okay. What if we communicate our own vulnerability without blaming or judging? What if we move the conversation away from blame or judgment in that moment to who did the right thing and who did the wrong thing? What if we move it away from that to the fact that we are having a relationship? Because let's face it, if I'm having a conversation with you about this, I'm in a relationship with you. If we are even at the point of me saying, I don't like what you did, and this applies in our larger world. If we say, I don't like what those people on the other side of the political aisle did, we are in a relationship with them. We feel impacted or influenced by someone whose perspective is different than ours. We're still in a relationship. So here's the nonviolent communication, or I like to call it the compassionate communication model of what you do instead. So you start with saying, wow, when you say that thing or do that thing, if it's someone who's not in the room, you just say to yourself, wow, when I heard that, ooh, wow. And now the trick is to just notice what the thing was that triggered you. Tricky is noticing what it was without blame or judgment. This is the key of a citizen or collaborative or cooperative kind of model of interaction. This is the difference between calling someone out and calling someone in how we talk about diversity issues. We're not calling you out, you're bad, you're bad. We're calling in, we're saying, oh, okay, a thing happened between us. A thing happened. What was the thing? Now, usually when we get triggered or feel upset with someone else, we've already made a judgment, right? I feel threatened. I feel ignored. I feel abandoned. Notice how all of those imply that we already know the other person's motivations. Okay? What we really want to say is, wow, you slammed the door. Wow, you said a word. You took an action, okay? That's all. Step number one is just know what the thing was without assuming that it was good or bad. That part's tricky. The goal here is just to know what actually made you have a feeling in the first place. Now, step number two is to say how you feel about it. And that's where the ignored, threatened, abandoned, dismissed, etc. comes in. Those are all judgments of the other person's motives, which we don't actually know. We think we know, but we don't actually know. And when we assume we know, we're not giving them a chance to tell us their truth. So, what's vulnerable is to say, wow, when you use that word, I feel scared. I feel really worried. I feel super confused. I actually really don't know how to respond to that. I'm actually having a feeling that makes me vulnerable, okay? That's a little bit harder. And it's especially hard when we're feeling threatened or scared. When we feel like we're in some kind of danger, it's really hard to then choose to say, I feel vulnerable. This is really countercultural, folks. It's really not something we're used to hearing. When we practice this in compassionate communication in groups, someone will say, well, my cousin sent me this message and they said, you're wrong, you have a stupid liberal perspective, whatever it is, right? And they'll say, I feel really rejected, or I feel really threatened. And I'll say, what does it feel like to feel rejected? What does abandoned feel like? What does threatened feel like? Let's take it off of them and put it on us. Do you feel scared? Do you feel angry? Do you feel confused? Do you feel a mix of those things? This is vulnerable. So, okay, that's just steps 1 and 2. If you get that far in the process, to step 3, you've now set the stage for everybody gets to be vulnerable together. And this in itself is showing that second quality, emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is being willing to identify and take responsibility for your state of being. Emotional maturity requires that we take responsibility for ourselves. Now, if you get that far, step 3 is saying, you know, I know that we have shared values. I know there's something that I really care about that you might care about too. So, step 1, when this happened, step 2, I felt scared, upset, confused, angry. Step 3, because I really care about something. I value something. Maybe it's I value nonviolence. Maybe it's I value all people's inherent worth and dignity, or I really care about the earth, or even this one, I really value you, your perspective. Maybe it's I really value our relationship. Think how vulnerable that makes you You have just done something that I'm really hurt by. And instead of saying, don't do that, it really hurt me. You're mean, you got to stop that. I say, wow, when you say that, I feel upset. I feel confused. I feel scared because I value you so much. Because this is so important to me, and I think it might be important to you too. Do you see how this is really different? This is building connections, not competing for power. The very fact that we feel a need to talk to or at or about someone else at all implicitly tells us that we are connected to them. And that can be really scary because we are connected to people who make us scared, who make us upset. Okay? It's good to acknowledge that. Think about it for a second. You may not want a connection with someone that you're feeling like you should talk to or at or about. You may feel that it's a dangerous connection or one that puts you in risk. But that you're even interested in thinking about them means you're connected. Acknowledging that connection makes you vulnerable, but being honest about it is emotional maturity. Okay, that's a lot. If you make it through the first 3 steps, you get to step 4, which is where you get to make a request. Now, note that I did not say you get to make a demand or a command. Remember those? Those are the subjects. Leaders, lords, rulers make demands of their subjects. Consumers make commands for the things that they want. Citizens do something different. This is all really about being a citizen rather than a subject or a consumer. Okay? Often our arguments are competitions to be the lord over the subject. I win, I lose, I get to make my demand. You surrender to me. Right? It's really fascinating. I even have to struggle with this giving a sermon on Sunday morning. This model itself, there's way too much 5-paragraph essay in this, even for me, right? I was thinking as I was writing this, what would it even look like? How would we do this differently as we talk going forward about what does it look like to act as citizens rather than consumers or subjects? What does a Sunday morning look like? Because this is a very subject-consumer version of communication that we're doing, right? So, what does it look like to make a request coming from a place of vulnerability and shared emotional connection? What does that even look like? So, what it looks like is this. It looks like saying something like, would you help me understand how you feel? Could you explain that to me more? It's actually making an invitation. Right? So this is both vulnerable and exciting. Vulnerable, emotionally mature communication and relating makes us equal with the person we are in a disagreement with. It puts us on equal footing in a place of equal power. We commit, so let me review some of those ideas of this citizen model, right? The citizen model requires acknowledging first and foremost that we are interdependent, which if our air quality this summer does not show that, nothing will, right? Canada's a long way away. We are interdependent. We cannot deny it. And we are interdependent with people and beings that we have no day-to-day conversations with, but we are interdependent. So first, we have to acknowledge we're interdependent. We have to commit to acting with, rather than to others or over others. We focus on a shared sense of purpose, and sometimes that means we have to find it. We have to find that shared sense of purpose. Even if it's just the most basic, we want to survive on this planet. We want our families to be safe and healthy, to care for the people we care for. Sometimes we might have to go to that level of generality to find the connection. Because ultimately, deep down, all humans want the same things. They just have different ways of wanting to get there. So we could describe a vulnerable, emotionally mature model of communication, which is a form of leadership, like this. We start with, wow, I noticed this thing, a word or an action that happened. And you know what? We might need to take a minute before we say this, because we might be too upset to say it. We might need to say to the other person, I need a minute. I'm going to go be with myself for a minute. And then I'm going to come back and say, wow, I noticed this thing that happened. And when we name it clearly, without judgment, we are being accountable. This is another citizen value. Accountable for our own self, for our own emotions and our own reactions, and accountable to the other person without establishing a hierarchy of who's better and who's worse and who's right and who's wrong. Next, we say, well, here's how that impacted me. It made me feel vulnerable. It made me feel whatever. And we move to shared values. I really care about or value or need something that I know we must have something in common or we wouldn't be having a conversation. This is where that core new stated UU value comes in. Love. Love. Love is at the center of it all. What do we, you and I, and the people that I disagree with in my family, in my town, what do we value? I guarantee you that love is a universal human value. So finally, there's the request. Given that at the core of the conversation you and I are having, that isn't about me trying to prove you wrong or make you do something different so I can feel better. At the core, this conversation is about love and some kind of shared values. It's about us both getting stronger and feeling better and being more able to express our inherent worth and dignity. The request doesn't have to ask them to change. In fact, in this model, the most effective requests don't require them to change at all, because the goal isn't winning, it's building connections over time. So here are some requests. Could you help me understand where you're coming from better? Could you explain how you came to that conclusion? What's really important to you that makes that seem like the best solution? Can you tell me more about how you learned that? How does that make sense to you? Where did you learn that habit? Where did you learn that behavior? What does it mean for you? How do you feel when you do it? What was happening for you that made you say or do that thing that upset me? Would you tell me what's really important to you? Do you see how different this is and how vulnerable and challenging this is? Don't get me wrong, folks. I understand that this is profoundly countercultural. It is going to go against, for many of us, everything we've been taught from kindergarten up, right? We've been taught to be persuasive and to convince people and to be right. This is really different. The goal of a citizen is not to get our way or be in power. It is to build strong connections in community towards shared values and goals. And we have to start by assuming and exploring those shared common values together, even if they are the most basic values of health, the ability to express yourself, to be seen, to be understood, to be loved. This all sounds super mushy. It sounds super mushy, but I will tell you that practiced and used in our conversations and our relationships, it is world-changing in having history stop repeating itself over and over and over again. Because ask yourself this, how many times have you had that fight? How many times have you had the same disagreement? And it kept going the same way every time. Whether it's with a relative or a friend or a neighbor or another political party or whoever it is. We don't make progress, and history repeats itself for us as a species because we keep throwing the defensiveness ball back and forth between ourselves. No, I'm going to defend myself. No, I'm going to defend myself. No, I'm going to defend. If we don't break that cycle of defensiveness, we'll just keep repeating the argument. So this is actually bold, daring, countercultural, and profoundly economically, politically, and environmentally relevant. So what about mentoring? Where does mentoring come in? In the stewardship leadership model, vulnerability, emotional maturity, and mentoring are tied together. So here's the deal. Every time one of us is able to practice and demonstrate this kind of connection, we are mentoring and modeling it for others. Every time we go through this internally or externally, taking the time to prioritize a balance of what's true for me, with caring equally about what's true for you and what you need, we support one another in another one of those values, transformation, shared growth, shared transformation. This is all inherently relational rather than transactional. It is, to use another key word from the proposed purposes and principles of our denomination, covenantal. A covenant is a concept we're going to talk about a lot more in the future in a couple of weeks specifically. When we talk about accountability, we're going to talk about covenantal relationships. Covenantal relationships, sometimes we say they're promises of the heart. They're relationships where we work together and hold each other together with a couple of shared assumptions. One is that we love each other, whatever that looks like. Respect, curiosity, doesn't have to look like the mushy romantic-y stuff. It can just be, I can honestly say, I love my congregation. I hold my congregation in covenantal trust, respect, caring, and love, right? Covenantal relationships are about collaborating and being held by higher values than our own personal sense of comfort or security. And getting there requires us allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to demonstrate emotional maturity, to make space for others to do the same, mentoring each other on a journey of growth and possibility. Now, I personally find this new way of thinking about the world. This citizen model is expressed in Rosenberg's nonviolent communication model. It's expressed in stewardship leadership. It's expressed in the revision of our principles and purposes. All of that is really pretty much the same thing. I personally find that really exciting and challenging. But it introduces us to some possibilities about breaking out of those old history. What's the song? History never repeats. I tell myself before I go to sleep. We know that history keeps repeating itself in our personal lives and in our public lives. And it seems to me that this version of trying things might be a way out of that. Next week, we're going to talk about some risks we might take doing this. Next week, we'll be talking about diversity and risk-taking, right? What are the kinds of risks we might be willing to take if we lived in this reality? If you were in a relationship with a person or a group of people that said, you know what, I totally have got your back, even if you do something that bothers me or ticks me off, even if I don't understand you, even if it makes me upset, I am still in it with you. Think about how much possibility we would have to try new things if we had each other that way. So we're going to talk about that next week. It is rich in potential and also challenge, right? I hope that as we move forward together in our congregations, in our communities, in our denomination, as we move forward with people who actually have deep values, we can practice the strength and the courage and the boldness and the absolute radical practice of this kind of vulnerability, the wisdom of this kind of emotional maturity, and the joy of actually being together in this kind of mentoring with one another. I hope that we can do some bold and brave experiments with that. May it be so. So we're going to have our offering in a second. You prepare yourselves to sing again in this new and bold way, right? Our offering each week is an opportunity to live one of those stated values of our denomination, which is generosity. And generosity can take lots of forms, right? It can just simply mean offering a smile. This congregation offers generosity towards partners and other communities. This quarter, we are sharing some of our generosity with our denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association. So some portion of the undesignated cash donations in the plate will go to our denomination. Other donations go to just making it possible for us to be here together. So whatever you are able to offer, and also for those of you who are virtual, you can do that online. You have an online option. You can donate through our website and through our online offering options, and we invite you to do that. Whatever you are able to give, whether it is just a smile or your voice as we attempt to sing, "From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live." I'm going to ask the choir to come on up and help lead that. You can do it. Be brave and vulnerable. We're just going to sing it through a couple of times, Sandra. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this. One more time. Yetta's got the hand motions. Let's try them. Okay. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. Okay, that was vulnerable and brave of you all. Good job. I invite you, if you are so inclined, to stand and join for our benediction. I think I'm going to go to the piano. We're going to try When I Breathe In again. So join hands if you like. Now, notice what happens, and for those of you who are with us virtually, I want you to imagine, everybody just take a second, point your eyes towards the camera. Wave. Because we are all doing this together. Notice as you're breathing, when you sing this, when I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. Actually imagine, craziness, breathing in some peace, not worrying about the words, go blah, 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 if you can't remember it at the same time. Imagine that you're breathing in the breath of the people around you, because you are, and it's okay, because we're pretty much at low numbers on COVID right now. So breathe in some peace. Imagine that you could breathe out love, and you've got connections, whether they're virtual or physical and material. You can actually kind of send that love out into the world.